Musashi built the kind of discipline that never once made the people closest to him comfortable, not admired, not understood. Everyone who watched him closely enough eventually called him something closer to insane than dedicated, and that reaction was never a misunderstanding. It was the price of what he was actually building. Most people assume discipline earns respect. Work hard enough, they think, and the room eventually applauds. Show up early enough times and someone notices. Sacrifice enough short-term comfort and the people around you start rooting for you the way a crowd roots for a runner in the final stretch. This is the story almost everyone tells themselves before they actually try to live at a level most people never reach. It is also almost completely wrong. The moment your standard passes a certain point, something changes in how people respond to you. The encouragement thins out, the jokes get sharper. Someone who has known you for years starts using words like extreme, obsessive, unhealthy, and they use them with a concern that does not quite match their tone. You are not getting weaker. You're not doing anything to them. You have simply started living by a measure they are not living by, and your existence has become evidence against the version of themselves they had made peace with. This is the part almost nobody explains, because it is uncomfortable to explain. When a man raises his own standard, he's not just changing his behavior, he is changing the terms by which everyone around him gets to feel adequate. As long as everyone in the room is operating at roughly the same level of effort, nobody has to confront how much they have been settling for. The second one person breaks from that average, the average itself becomes visible, and visibility of that kind is rarely welcomed. Calling the disciplined man crazy is cheaper than asking why his life is moving and yours is not. It is worse now than it has ever been, because everyone's baseline effort is visible in a way it never used to be. A man does not need to watch his neighbor train to feel the sting of comparison anymore. He only needs to open his phone for 4 seconds and see someone his age already living the life he keeps postponing. That visibility manufactures more excuses to call ambition unhealthy than any previous generation had access to, because judging someone else's intensity is a much easier way to manage that sting than actually raising your own. A man named Harry found this out slowly without ever setting out to prove a point. He cut the drinking on weeknights, moved his training to 5 in the morning, and stopped scrolling his phone after 9 at night. Nothing dramatic, no speeches to his friends about a new chapter. Within a few months, the group had started calling him the monk, half joking, and the joke never quite landed as a joke. Invitations came a little less often, not because Harry had become unpleasant to be around, but because his presence at the table made certain choices harder to make without noticing them. He felt it before anyone said it directly, the small flicker of tension when he ordered water, and someone else suddenly felt the need to explain their second drink. He did not stop. 2 years later, the group that had nicknamed him was mostly exactly where it had been, and Harry had built something none of them could name, because none of them had built it themselves. This pattern shows up long before anyone reaches Musashi's level. The friend who suddenly needs an explanation for why you're turning down a night out. The family member who asks if you're being too hard on yourself, when what they actually mean is that your restraint is making their own indulgence harder to justify. The slight cooling in a conversation the moment you mention a goal you are serious about, instead of one you are only talking about. None of that proves you are doing something wrong. Most of the time, it proves the opposite. Miyamoto Musashi understood this mechanism better than almost anyone in recorded history, because his own method was considered reckless by the swordsmen of his time. Every serious school in Japan trained the long sword with both hands, the accepted way to generate power and control. Musashi built his entire style around the opposite, training himself and his students to fight with a sword in each hand, one hand controlling a blade most men needed two to manage. Rival dojos did not call it innovative. They called it the kind of thing a man does once he has stopped listening to reasonable advice. He wrote plainly about why he kept training that way regardless. Bows are difficult to draw at first, he said, and halberds are difficult to wield at first, and a sword in one hand is no different, difficult only until the hand has done it enough times to stop calling it difficult. He also refused to let himself or his students grow attached to a single comfortable weapon, warning that becoming overly familiar with one tool was as much a failure as never learning it, because comfort with one method quietly becomes the excuse to stop training the rest. None of that reads as strange doctrine now. At the time, refusing the two-handed grip every serious swordsman in the country relied on looked less like discipline and more like a man convinced of something nobody else could see. He put the same logic into a line from the book that carries his name, one that reads like simple advice until you have tried to live by the method behind it. Know the smallest things and the biggest things. Most readers take that as a call to pay attention. It is something sharper than that. It means most people never look closely enough at either end of their own life to know the difference between the discipline they perform and the discipline they actually practice. And the gap between those two things is where every excuse lives. Isaac Newton earned a similar reputation a few centuries later, just through isolation instead of an unconventional grip. During the plague years of 1665 and 66, while Cambridge emptied out, he isolated himself almost entirely and produced the early foundations of calculus and his theory of gravity, largely alone, while the people who knew him assumed he had simply vanished from ordinary life. History remembers the isolation as genius in hindsight. Nobody around him called it that at the time. Here is the cost that never gets mentioned in the version of discipline sold to beginners. The higher your standard climbs, the smaller your circle of people who can meet you at it without resentment becomes. This is not a flaw in the process. It is the process. You cannot build something that requires uncommon effort while surrounded exclusively by people who have agreed, consciously or not, that uncommon effort is unnecessary. At some point, you have to choose between being fully understood and being fully built, because for a long stretch of the road, you do not get both. The shift most men need to make is not toward caring less what people think. That advice is too vague to use. The shift is toward treating the discomfort of others as information about them, not about you. When someone tells you that you're taking something too far, the question worth asking is simple. Has this person ever built the thing you are currently building? If the answer is no, their opinion of your intensity is not a measurement of your intensity. It is a measurement of their own ceiling, projected onto you because it is easier than admitting the ceiling exists. Consider the alternative for a moment, because it is worth sitting with before this goes any further. A man who quietly retreats every time someone calls his effort excessive spends the next 10 years liked. He also spends the next 10 years exactly where he started, because every standard he tried to hold got negotiated down by someone else's comfort before it had time to compound. Likability and capability are not opposites, but when they compete for the same decision, only one of them survives long term, and it is rarely the one that gets applauded in the room. This is where the practical part actually starts, because understanding the mechanism does nothing if it stays in your head. Tonight, before you sleep, write down one standard you have quietly been lowering just to keep the people around you comfortable. Whether that is how early you train, how you spend your evenings, or what you allow yourself to say yes to. Raise it back tomorrow morning without announcing it to anyone. Announcing it invites negotiation, and negotiation is exactly how standards get worn back down in the first place. Stop explaining yourself when you do not need to. Every time you justify why you are training at 5 or why you are staying in on a weeknight, you hand the room a vote on whether your standard gets to survive the conversation. You do not need their vote. State what you're doing plainly if it is asked, and then let the silence do the rest of the work. Then hold a floor for the next 30 days, one small enough that missing it would be almost impossible to justify. 5 minutes of the hardest task on your list before anything else touches your attention. 10 pages, one uncomfortable conversation you have been circling for weeks. The size of the floor matters less than whether you can defend it on your worst day, because the entire value of a standard is proven on the days you did not feel like keeping it, not on the days it was easy. And build a decision rule you can return to every time this happens again, because it will happen again. When the criticism arrives dressed as concern, run it through one filter before you let it change anything. Does this person have the standing to speak on this, earned through their own results, or are they simply uncomfortable watching mine change? Most of the time, the honest answer disqualifies the criticism before you even finish the sentence. If this hits somewhere true, drop one phrase in the comments and mean it, because typing it in public makes it slightly harder to quietly walk it back tomorrow. Musashi wrote something else that most people skip past because it sounds abstract until you have lived the first part of this. In the void is virtue and no evil. He was not describing emptiness as a hole to fill. He was describing the specific quiet that arrives once you stop needing the room's approval to keep going, once the noise of other people's discomfort stops registering as a verdict on whether you are doing the right thing. That quiet is not available to everyone, and it is not available for free. It costs invitations. It costs the easy version of certain friendships. For a long time, it costs the comfort of being fully understood by the people closest to you, because they are watching you become someone they cannot measure against themselves anymore. Every man who has actually reached the level of discipline he claims to want has paid some version of this price, usually quietly, usually without anyone clapping for it. The deeper breakdowns, including how figures like Musashi built standards nobody around them could verify, live over on the Patreon, away from an algorithm that tends to reward whichever version of this message asks the least of you. Check the link in the description. Musashi did not earn the label of madman by accident, and he did not earn it because anyone told him it was worth pursuing. He earned it by holding a standard nobody around him could verify for longer than anyone around him was willing to watch. That is not a warning. It is the whole instruction. The day someone finally calls you crazy for what you are building is not the day you went too far. It is the day you finally went far enough for it to show. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more videos, make sure you hit like and subscribe. I'll see you soon.